Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. I was saying to Ben, our friend and intern and videographer, it feels like it's been forever, but because we didn't do anything in August. I'm curious, show of hands, was anyone here at our literary festival this summer? That was the last time we had a formal discussion, and after our monthly series, it seems like it's been a while, so it's great to kick this back off into high gear. I'm Sean Murphy, for those of you that haven't been to one of these events, and I am the founder and executive director of 1455, which is very much a work in progress. We intend to be a year-round nonprofit writers retreat and center for literary arts right here in downtown Winchester. We're currently renovating a series of properties that we've purchased, and we hope to open in the next year. And in the meantime, we're doing what we intend to do once we open, which is have a lot of free programming to elevate awareness of the arts and feature outstanding writers. And I've been fortunate to attract many of them. Our author tonight happens to be a dear friend of mine. We'll explain our backstory and how we got from there to here. But Ronnie has come down from New York City, upstate New York, even further.
I live in the Hudson Valley.
So New York. So this is really exciting that we have an out-of-towner here for this. As always, I want to thank Barbara here at the Henley Library. Brian is representing Winchester Book Gallery. There will be books available for sale and for signing after the event. But let's just get right into it. I want to introduce Ronnie, and then she'll read a short excerpt from the book. And then I've got some questions, but as always, we want to encourage Q&A and interaction from the audience. So we won't wait till, if there are questions, when I start mine, you can raise your hand and I'll make sure we get you in. We don't want to reserve for the last 5 minutes. I want anyone that has any questions or thoughts to be able to jump in. So let me introduce Ronnie. Ronnie Citron-Fink is the author of True Roots, What Quitting Hair Dye Taught Me About Health and Beauty. She's a contributor to A Glorious Freedom on being a woman getting older and living an extraordinary life. She works for the Environmental Defense Fund as the editorial director of the Mom's Clean Air Force. Ronnie has written for InStyle, USA Today, Huffington Post, Medium, and other publications. Please join me in welcoming Ronnie Citron-Fink.
Thank you, Sean.
So what do you think? You want
me to stand up at the podium? Does that help?
Your call.
I can sit here. I have kind of like, from New York. We kind of have volume in our voice. So
do you think you need this, or
do I need this? Should I use this? Can you hear me? Usually you can hear me, but I can do it this way. So I'm going to read from my introduction, and it's only about 5 minutes. So, and then I'll just give you a little bit of idea about the book, and then I can talk more about the book, and we can have some questions, and you can ask some questions. So here's the book cover, of which I fought very hard for, because I had a whole lot of ideas on how I wanted the book cover, and my publisher had a lot of different ideas. So that was probably the only part of the publishing process that had like a glitch. Otherwise, it went very smoothly. My publisher is Island Press, who is in Washington, D.C., and they do a lot of environmental books, and I found them fabulous. Anyway, so it's True Roots, What Quitting Hair Dye Taught Me About Health and Beauty. I've come to think of this book as a negotiation between health and beauty, a conversation that started when the two collided with an obsession, hair. So in the spirit of honest dialogue, I have to begin with 2 confessions. 1, I loved my dark-dyed hair until it stopped loving me back. And 2, I'm not going to tell you to stop coloring. Neither of these admissions sits easily with my role as an environmental health activist. For years, scientists have known that chemicals in personal care products were threatening women's health. Now, word of the questionable ingredients is out on the street, not only on the street, but also down the aisles of Sephora. Even beauty magazines are publishing articles about phthalates and parabens and endocrine disruptors that interfere with the body's natural hormones. Yet, I spent 25 years coloring my tresses before I asked a colleague, an environmental scientist, are the chemicals in hair dye toxic? Her answer was my wake-up call. It spurred me to begin asking a host of other questions and ultimately to write this book. What's the connection between coloring and cancer? Who regulates the hair dye industry? What are the risks for hairdressers? Are all dyes created equal? Do safer alternatives exist? Where does all that dye end up after it's washed down the drain? This truth-seeking investigation also led me to a more personal question. Given everything I was learning about the potential dangers of hair dye, why was the thought of giving it up so terrifying? I realized that for me, as for many women, hair dye was the magic elixir. And it made me feel youthful. Ditching the dye would mean confronting strongly held cultural beliefs, mine and others. My mother still dyes her hair, 92. Some of them so ingrained that I was barely aware of them, beliefs about beauty, choice, aging, and femininity. It would also mean flouting fashion and beauty gurus, the media, decades of powerful and seductive advertising, my girlfriends, and even the expectations of the men in my life. Taking responsibility for my health is personal. My hair story is personal. How can I tell other women how to look or feel about gray hair? I can't. But I can give you two things I didn't have when, as a young mother, I began noticing my first gray hairs. First, information. Consumers deserve to know what's in the products we're massaging on our scalps. To make informed decisions about our health, we need to understand basic facts about questionable ingredients. And with little transparency required from hair care companies, those facts are not always clear and not easy to find. Second, I can give you my own example and those of other women who are questioning the helpfulness of hair dye. When I started going gray in my 30s, there were no silver hair models gracing the covers of magazines. The thought of not coloring never even occurred to me. Remember, I'm from New York. And then when 25 years later, I finally took the plunge and ditched the dye, I found myself facing tough beauty dilemmas. Would I opt for a short pixie cut, blend in my incoming grays with highlights, go cold turkey and let the skunk stripe widen naturally? What about that infamous purple shampoo? And ultimately, how old would I look? One thing that made a big difference in reconciling my transition from dye to natural hair was finding a community of silver sisters, from women leading by example. Not only did I get helpful tips, including eating oysters, who knew, I also learned about a different kind of transition, the one that happens internally. While every woman has to find her own path, it helps to share the journey to self-acceptance. That's the grace of gray. So with a generous dose of humility, I've tried to create a guide to the complexities of environmental health and the revelatory beauty for women of all ages. We wonder if the choices we make will keep us healthy and whether they're worth it. Maybe you picked up this book because you've been toying with the what ifs. What if I stop coloring and my hair looks awful? What if it makes me feel old? What if my boss or colleagues treat me differently? What if my partner doesn't find me sexy anymore? What if, what if, what if? Maybe you're not ready to give up coloring cold turkey. If that's the case, you'll find particular ingredients to avoid, safer alternatives, and a better understanding of the risks. Or if you're contemplating a going gray transition, you can tuck away the information in this book and take it out again when you're ready to discover for yourself the sweet spot between hair, health, and beauty. When we open ourselves to change, the hope, that most luxurious of feelings, is that we'll find our way to good health. It springs up because looking good matters only if you feel good. That's the prize. The rest is just hair. So that's my introduction. And so I kind of went through this. It all started at this meeting that I had at the Environmental Defense Fund in Washington. I go back and forth to Washington a lot. I work remotely at home because I'm an editor, so I can pretty much do most of that at home and also in my car today as I was driving. And when I had very, 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 very dark hair, very long, very dark, black almost hair that I dyed a lot. I mean, anybody who dyes their hair or dyed their hair, it has this much gray, probably I've at least had this much gray for at least 15 years or so. The upkeep is just constant. I had to go and have, color put on all the time, and then I'd have to, I really felt that like the minute I walked out of the salon, I could like almost see my roots. So, so as my gray kind of took over my dark color, almost black, it just kind of overwhelmed me. And I got to the point where I needed to have like this mantra. Why will I stop? It was, the cost was crazy, and I outlined the whole cost in the book. I was going to the salon and doing touch-ups in between. The upkeep was also crazy because you've got to go every 4 to 6 weeks to have the full color done, and then I really had to do my part every 2 weeks. So I would go to Whole Foods and I'd get this whatever they had because I thought, well, that would be healthier, and it kind of covered. But I actually researched that also and found out that even these natural beauty products that say, organic or all natural, and not necessarily have to look at each and every ingredient. Anyway, when I was at this, we were talking in this meeting about toxic chemical reform and about the buildup, the body buildup that we have, which makes it very hard to isolate what is causing a certain disease. So in other words, you can't really say that just because you had lead, can you imagine lead, in your hair dye, that's what's, causing a certain neurologic disease, which lead does. So we were having this discussion, and as the environmental health journalist, I had kind of known this. I knew that our products were somewhat unregulated and untested. And but as the scientist was talking, I looked around the room and I could see like my young colleagues wiping the lipstick off their face, and they were peeling their nail polish, and everybody was, everything. We were like, oh my God, we were going through all of the products in our mind. They were telling us that most women use 16 products a day, and I'm thinking, everybody's counting, and we're all figuring it out. They were predominantly women, because I work on an organization that works with parents, teaching them about climate change and toxic chemicals. And so we're almost all women. We have one guy that works with us, and I just all of a sudden felt like my scalp was tingling, and I knew that I had to ask. So when I asked her, she said to me, her answer kind of led me to the investigation, and everybody in the room said, you have to find out the answers to all those questions. We all need to know these questions. So she said to me, the economic success of hair color collides so powerfully with popular demand that the task of understanding the landscape goes beyond science and beyond law. So beyond the regulatory, beyond what's going on in science, we have the media. And that's really what drives, as we know, our beauty products. I'm not going to get heavily into the beauty aspects, but we all know that there's a double standard between, although there's so many great gray heads out there, but we all know that there's a double standard between men and women, and and we get these that men are they're called distinguished when they go gray, and women are looked at as if they've given up, like, oh, they can't be bothered anymore. It's just too much of a problem. So we get these messages that are overt and they're subliminal, and from the media to like cover up if we care about our beauty, and so this is something that I definitely had. I definitely ascribed to this, and I didn't know anybody who went gray. I had one or two friends who didn't cover their gray, but they didn't have that much, or they were just kind of like very rebellious on certain levels, on beauty levels anyway. And I work in a very young job, and I was in my 50s at the time, and I felt like I needed to stay relevant in certain ways. And so giving that up had other ramifications. I had a boss, I think I read about this part I wrote for InStyle magazine, a kind of a funny piece called I'm Going Gray. I can't remember what it was, but it was all of the comments that people said to me about going gray. And I had a wonderful, wonderful boss in Washington who was the boss of my boss. And she took me out for lunch and she said to me, you have a young face. Why would you do that? And I thought, we're the same age, and she's good, the beautiful blonde, dyed hair. And I said, at this point I had this skunk line because I went cold turkey. So I didn't blend it in. There was something very empowering for me. Once I made the decision, I was like, I'm not gonna, if I'm doing this because I don't want the chemicals, I'm not gonna start putting more chemicals in to cover up the white. And then I heard that, everybody always, in a lot of these book talks that I do, people say, but can't you just dye your hair white and then let it just keep cutting it? You really can't. What it does, the bleach is really, really strong. You have to take it up to a very high, I talked to hairdressers in the book, level, and it basically really damages your hair. You're better off getting a pixie, to be honest with you. Go short. I didn't do that. I just went with the skunk thing. And, but I found it empowering, to feel comfortable. I started to feel much more comfortable in my own skin. And this is, my story kind of runs through this environmental health story, but the environmental health story is big. We have known about these issues for a really long time. There's a part in the book where I talk about in the 70s that Ms. Magazine does the whole, they go to a hearing about toxic chemicals in personal care, in cosmetics, and a lot of these chemicals, the ingredients cross over. And they knew that hair dye was toxic then. And Clairol was Ms. Magazine's #1, it was Bristol Myers in those days, #1 advertiser, and they asked Gloria Steinem to pull that part of the article out, to take, not to report on the hearing. And she said no. This is in the book. It's really kind of an interesting story. She says no, and Ms. almost went under. They lost their ad dollars from Clairol, which was the biggest in those days. And now L'Oreal has now overtaken Clairol, so I've heard. Anyway, when we dye hair, it's important to consider why we dye and what the potential risks are. And I also interviewed Paul Hawken, who wrote Drawdown, and I asked him a lot of questions. He knew a ton of questions about billions and billions of, I asked him what happens, could he trace what happened from the salons into, where does it go? And he explained the whole thing to me on the phone. He's very, I don't know if you know the book, but Paul Hawken is a really visionary environmentalist, and he started Erewhon Foods, and he's been involved in all of it. He's written a whole lot of books. And he basically said to me that women are crash test dummies. He says, you just have to, for the beauty industry. And that's how he described it. Wow. He basically said, we have no idea. Well, what we do know, and these are, I'll just give you a little of statistics and then maybe you can break it and stop me. But what we do know, that with over 75% of American women using hair dye at some point in their lives. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's dyeing their hair to cover the gray. Kids use it, teenagers use it, men use it. I have a whole section about men. Men is where lead acetate is, and there is no safe level. I know as an environmental health specialist that there are no safe levels of lead. So, and they're in Just for Men and Grecian Formula, which are the two most popular. And that's actually, they've been, the environmental organizations have been like NRDC and EDF and Women's Health, Voices for the Earth, and Environmental Working Group. They fight this stuff constantly, but they're up against this huge chemical lobby. And it's really hard to get anything done. And in this administration, it's actually even, as you can imagine, a little more difficult. So the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, cites hair dye as a major risk factor for certain types of cancer. The University of Southern California study found that women who had colored their hair once per month for 15 years or more had a 50% higher risk of bladder cancer. I had no idea. I thought it was everything. I stumbled upon that after I had read all this studies about hairdresser health, which is where the studies have been done on the health of hairdressers, and they have like a bevy of issues from working in salons. The American Cancer Society classifies some chemicals that are used in hair dye as reasonably anticipated to be human carcinogens. It's important that the studies are done. What they say is that it's important that more studies are done to get a better idea if these dyes affect cancer, how they affect the cancer risk. Dominique Browning, I don't know, she writes for the New York Times. She is my boss at EDF and at Mont Air Force. She runs our organization, and she wrote the foreword for my book, and she said that we are racing for cures for heartbreaking diseases, and we should also focus on another race, a race for the causes. So I'm going to stop there because I could get heavily into like the regulatory stuff if you're interested in hairdresser health, but I think we should stop and I could take some questions. And if you have any interest, I can. The chemicals of concern there's three. One I mentioned, and one is ammonia. Ammonia is a potential endocrine disruptor, and ammonia is in most hair dyes. You can find ammonia-free hair dyes. PPD is a coal tar derived from petroleum. And mostly those are allergic reactions. I actually had a dermatologist come to one of my talks, and she said it is the #1 reaction from hair products. It's a very long name, but it says PPD on the hair dye. And toluene, which is a neurotoxin. So and formaldehyde. But we won't go into that. My own hairdresser was having issues because he was doing Brazilian blowouts, and the formaldehyde, when it's heated, off gases, and he got asthma. And I said, don't you know that you're getting asthma because of what you're doing, like your profession? He actually gave up doing color as he was working. I wrote this book, which my story goes through the whole book, and he's part of the whole story also. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, I'll take a little break.
Okay.
So I could talk about this for,
Well, of course.
I could talk about hair all day.
Well, so I'm so proud of you for having written this book for a variety of reasons. One, just you've amply demonstrated that to me, it would be a fascinating story as a personal memoir, but because of your background.
But it didn't sell as a memoir.
We can get into that. But you're helping expose how a lot of these things are interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And so your story is, in many regards, every woman's story, and to an extent, every man's story, because it's not just hair dye, and it's all of the things that we put in our body that are heavily advertised. And I think you never want to reduce things to very simple terms, but usually follow the money will tend to get you where you need to go in terms of who's boosting things that are demonstrably unhealthy. But I'm also proud of you because I've known Ronnie. We first met at Martha's Vineyard at a writing residency that I then ran for a year, and I have seen this project come to fruition from its early stages as a series of essays and the ups and downs, and then you mentioned how you had trouble selling it as a memoir.
Started as a memoir.
I think it would be fascinating for you to talk about not just the. I think you've made it clear what the personal kind of health, psychological aspects, but talk about the process itself, because that's a whole story in terms of, this was not a book that she sold right out of the gate and wrote in a couple of months, and here we are. So I think it'd be very enlightening for you to talk a little bit about the trajectory of what took you from idea to sitting here tonight.
Sure. Well, I stopped dyeing my hair about 5 years ago, and I am a writer, and you heard why I decided to write the book, and it kind of to get over some of that angsty feelings that I was having about beauty issues. I put a lot of that down on paper, and I came to Noepe. It was called the Martha's Vineyard Writers Residency. My daughter lives in Martha's Vineyard then, and I thought it was going to be a memoir. I had written probably 50, 60 pages of it, and I had no idea how to write a book. I've written tons of articles, thousands of articles, and I had no idea how to write a book. And my boss, who's written a lot of books, said, "Oh, just go and write it." And I said, "Don't I need like an agent or like something?" She said, "No, you don't need anything. You just go and you write a book. Then you figure it out." And I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I got to Noepe to the Writers Residency, which is this grand inn that used to be called the Pointway Inn. And I sat around the table with the residents. You weren't at this one this time. There were 11 of us. And we all went around. And when it got to the time where I had to like do my little elevator pitch, which I didn't really have down yet, and I had this, this skunk thing going on in my head. And there was a woman sitting next to me, and she went first, and she said, "I have a 6-figure advance." And I was like, "What's an advance? Like, what does that mean, a 6-figure advance?" And she was in her 30s, and she was a Brown University professor. And she said, "So I have to get to work and she had a whole thing. I've got to get my outline, and I've got to get my proposal, and I've got to get my agent wants this, and my publisher wants this." And I thought, this is really interesting. And I actually learned how to go about the business of writing through the residency. And one morning, she said, "Your book is going to sell. Your book is going to sell. I know it's going to sell. People want your story. It's so interesting. Women go through this, men go through this." And so she said, "Let me see your outline, because like I work with students and I can help you." And I'm thinking, okay. I'm like, am I 15? She's like 30 something, and she's now my teacher. Okay, I can do this. I work with lots of younger people. So we're in the kitchen in our pajamas, because this is the kind of place it is. And she pulls the paper towel out and starts asking me questions with the magic marker. And she comes up with like 15 questions that I answer. She writes down my answers. She said, "There's your outline, go write your book." And I was like, okay, I still have that. And her name is LaShonda Patrice. Is that her last name?
I don't know.
Barrett. Anyway, she's amazing. She went on to write 2 6-figure books. And we kind of stay friends on Facebook. But so I knew I needed an outline. Someone else told me, now that you have your outline, you need to write a proposal. I had no idea how to write a proposal. I got a book on how to write a proposal. And this is great. There is a great book. It's called How to Write a Proposal, and a book proposal. And I studied that book every morning before I started work. I worked every morning, probably for 2 hours. I would work from like 7 to 9 every morning on getting the proposal. I wrote the whole proposal, went back to the residency, wrote the whole proposal, and I sent out query letters. I learned how to send out query letters to 6 agents that I read in the book called How to Find an Agent. And it has all the agents in it. A few people gave me the names of people, but then I would look them up and I thought, I need someone who does women's issues and feminism and also does environmental health, because I knew that this environmental health piece would be part of it, because that would help me sell the book, because that's who I am. And I sent it out. I got 2 rejections and 4 offers for representation, which was incredible, I'm told. And I interviewed 2 of them, and I took the one that told me that she could get me on Oprah. So that never happened, and eventually she couldn't sell the book. And she took my proposal. I said, what can we do to make the proposal better? And she says, stay the course. We're just going to use your proposal. This book is going to sell. She had all these great things to say for me, and she had some really great authors. And it didn't sell, and I told her to stop, because I was not, all the rejections were they were just too much for me. Even though I've written articles and had pitches rejected, but I just put so much into this that the rejections had gotten to me. And so I just said stop, and I went back to the other agent, who is my agent, Diana Finch, and she said, this is not a book about your story. Your story is not that interesting. You're like, it's like everyone. We all have these kinds of stories. She says, what's really interesting is the environmental health story, because that's big, it's huge. And I was like, that's going to be a lot of research. And that's what it ended up being. And I went from a 30-page proposal that I wrote by myself to a 140-page proposal that she and I put together, which was really deep. And from that, I was able to it just guided the whole process. Maybe I got too far into it.
So the proposal helped you write the book?
Proposal 100% helped me write the book.
Because that just sounds, especially for fiction writers, right? 140-page proposals, like, this is the book.
Fiction writers don't write proposals. So it's non-fiction writers need to have a proposal. They don't have to write the whole book. For fiction, the agents and the editors want to see completed manuscripts. From what unless you're a known entity.
Right. So then what? I know that the story, and that's when we got to know each other. I was definitely, I believed that for a variety of societal and literary reasons, this story would resonate. So I definitely had a confidence that...
You always believed in me.
But I believed in it because of what, the first or the first and second agent said, which was, there's a lot there. And I think with a lot of projects like this, that can be a good thing or a bad thing. There's too much going on, but your mission was always very clear, but you had to do, and I think you reluctantly accepted, I do have to dive in and do some research. Like, there's not going to be an easy way out. If you were a celebrity, that probably would have worked, right? Like Meryl Streep talking about, this is how I dyed my hair. Everyone wants to read about that.
Right.
For most of us, there does have to be some underpinning of kind of facts, and I think that made it a much stronger book.
Absolutely.
With lasting value.
And I loved doing the research. Loved. That was really, I'm a personal essay writer, and that's what I really love doing that, writing personal narrative. And so I didn't think that doing all that research, I just thought it would just take freaking forever. And it was like digging this beautiful hole. Like, I would go to one spot and then I would go to another, and then it would lead me down this rabbit hole of other information. And everybody I spoke to for the book, including Paul Hawken and some of the other really interesting people that I have connections through my work with, they were excited and really interested. NPR last week, just did a big profile on this. They used my book as the backdrop for it, and that was really fun. I've had a lot of like really incredible marketing and great marketing team and publicity, except for the beauty magazines. So the funny story is that because the idea was we could sell it to, it's an environmental health story, but it really also is kind of like this baby boomer aging kind of, there's lots of threads of all of that equal in there, actually even more maybe. And so when the book came out, I've been working for a few years with a really great editor at InStyle magazine, which is a pretty high profile, and she was like, she formally asked my editor for first publishing rights, first excerpt publishing rights. Exclusive, that's what it was, exclusive excerpt publishing rights. So they were breaking over the champagne, my publicity team. This is gonna be great, because once you get, those kind of big, high profile things. So that was great. So as soon as we got the galleys of the book, we sent it immediately to them. They got the first galleys of the book. And then I sent her a really nice personal note, like, I'm so excited for you to read the book. We've been, the piece that we ran, we've been writing together, have been really great. Nothing, never heard back from her. I contacted her on Twitter, which is where all of the beauty editors are, and that's what they follow each other, and that's where you can find all about all the pitching goes on. And eventually I got something back and saying that, and they were going to do it on pub date, on our publishing date, which was June 4th. And Longreads asked if they could have a big excerpt of the book. And we were holding them off. And Longreads is a really great publication also. And eventually, the day before, we opened it up and gave it to Longreads and never got into InStyle. So it's definitely, I think what's really interesting is I had some very interesting people write some blurbs on the back of the book, and Elizabeth Benedict, who's an author, she's written lots and lots of books. She wrote, "True Roots is the book the hair care industry does not want you to read. It's lively, pervasive, and shocking. Information we desperately need to make informed choices about what we are willing to do to our health for the sake of trying to look young." So that's probably one of the reasons. It just the beauty industry just can't. It's
right.
It's
but
an
did you
$80 billion industry.
Did you get a straight answer from your contact?
Never got an answer from my.
But do you suspect, because she had seen, this wasn't sight unseen, right? She knew what the book was about.
It is after she read
it was somebody above her that put the kibosh on it.
Yeah, she was really excited.
Right.
And she actually knew that it was about chemicals, because every time I wrote an article, I would say something and she would pull out the chemicals. She would definitely pull any of the environmental health out, which was okay. That's what they do. But I was very lucky to have Lori David, who did The Inconvenient Truth with Al Gore. She was the producer, and Larry David's ex-wife wrote a blurb for me, which was kind of fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's been fun. I've had a lot of fun with this.
Of course.
It's great.
So, does anyone have any thoughts or questions? I want to make sure we open it up to dialogue. I've got a ton of questions, but I definitely want to make sure people that are here, if anyone has any questions for Ronnie about the process of writing it, or what are the worst chemicals, or...
Can you find in something that's safe, if we all just read out every box of shampoo or something, or is it?
No, there are safer alternatives for hair dye, specifically.
Hair dye or makeup, I mean,
Well, makeup is the next thing we can talk about, but that's something else I can talk about a little bit about.
Sure.
But hair dye, in regards to hair dye, my editor asked me to write a chapter about like safer beauty products to give people hope. There is a lot of research that's being done right now on safer beauty products. And in terms of hair dye, henna is without PPD. Now, some henna that comes from overseas, which all comes from foreign shipments, has some of the chemicals in it, the coal tars. But henna is basically plants, and they do recommend it for the American Cancer Society. Says that if you want to color your hair, you should use henna. And henna is much better than some of us might remember. I remember in college, I played around a little with henna, and it turned my hair orange. And it's much more refined. They've refined it, and so there are some really some good hennas. There's some other products that are coming up.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to ask you, to kind of flip it around. We could probably talk all night, and you could probably have written 100 books about all the scams and the misinformation and lack of regulation. But I think to put a genuine positive spin in terms of follow the money, there's money to be made from healthy alternatives. So what are some of the, there have to be some companies that are recognizing, even if it's a fad, which I don't think most of us would agree it is, there's got to be a lot of money being spent to promote healthy alternatives to some of these things.
I think the most important thing is what people can do when it comes to it, because it's all about regulations. We see this in the oil and gas industry, we see this in the gun lobby, we see this in all of these food, FDA. It has to do with the regulatory stuff.
Sure.
Because the companies, for the most part, will do the least for the cheapest. I mean, that's business first. Yeah. And but companies need to sell products. So if we boycott products, specific products with specific ingredients, right. And really, advocate for stronger regulations for these personal care products. And you can see it's happening with Johnson & Johnson just got hit with a huge lawsuit about talcum powder, about their baby powder. And huge, because there were women that were using it for years and years and years. And they have no testing on what happens over time to these products. And they have no idea what happens when we mix them all up, when there's this chemical soup in our body, and we're all different. We all have a different, kind of chemical footprint, and body burden, we call it in the environmental health world. So we just don't know. So it's really important that we need the studies, and if we really make a stink, quote unquote,
sure.
We can, and boycott certain things, which is what happened with talc. They pushed it, and Johnson & Johnson is huge, and they pushed, and it got slammed with big lawsuits. It's happening in the end of the writing of the book. I was doing more research, and I found that a litigator was working on testing products, and decided to test her little, I think 7-year-old daughter's play makeup, and found that there was asbestos in it. Asbestos in play makeup. Play makeup, that's the same kind of makeup we use for Halloween, and it's supposed to say non-toxic on it, and safe for kids. There is no safe levels of these chemicals, and she was shocked, and that started this whole ball rolling over Claire, the kids' toy store, the kids. I remember going with my daughter, getting my ears pierced at Claire's.
Sure.
With her, and so these things are happening, but we have to be have to bring them out there. If we boycott, they're gonna change them. They want to sell products. They have to sell products. Sometimes they put in what in the environmental health world we call regrettable substitutions. So in other words, we see this with BPA in the lining of cans. So it'll say, they'll put something else in, some other chemical that hasn't gone through the whole scrutiny, but sometimes it's just worse. So it's just,
So I've got two questions. One is a follow-up, because what I wanted you to talk a little bit more also. I agree and hear you about boycotting and the power of protest. But I'm wondering, are there companies either in existence or newer companies
There are.
that are purposefully doing it the right way? Because that's my point. There's money in that too. So I think there's cause for hope that people recognize, people are aware of these things. But then the kind of tie into that is, how much of this, in your opinion, is an awareness issue at this point? And if, say, a genie could come out of the bottle and break it all down and very easily digestible, where it's very clear what the health risks are. Do you feel that because of all the other implications like vanity and the power of marketing, do you have a sense of what percentage of the population would say, I can't give this up? Like, has your research given you a sense of even being aware of the risks, it's an acceptable risk, or is it still so many people don't know about this, that's why it is so rampant?
I think it's both. I think a lot of people don't understand that the FDA has no oversight, and it's run by it's called the Cosmetic Review, and that is it's an industry-led panel that decides what's going to be in our products, and that what happens is it has to be proven harmful after it lands on the shelves, after it's been used. So it's very, very hard. It's not an easy fix.
Right.
What happens is that, but I do think that women are becoming, and men are becoming, much more aware of these issues, and that we're seeing it more in the mainstream, and I do see it in certain like cosmetic companies. I haven't seen it in the hair care.
Okay.
They're not there yet.
Sure.
But I have seen it in companies like Beauty Counter. I don't know if you've ever heard of Beauty Counter. I used to. But so I've gone through I went through all the testing. So Lindsay Dahl, who runs there, she was a lobbyist for the environmental groups. And she actually runs a huge piece of it. And the woman who owned Beauty Counter, I got to meet, Greg Renfrew, and she's doing this because she had cancer at a young age, and decided that she wanted to get the best products out. Now, are they the best? They're better, a lot better. There are very few that pass, that pass the test. And nobody knows what they're going to be. People are allergic to plants. You get allergic to allergens. So we just don't know what we're allergic to, and we just don't know how it all percolates in our bodies. But so it's just I think it's just an awareness. It's really important to know and to make an informed decision, because I do believe that knowledge is power. I think that that's a big part of it. The more we know, the more we can figure out how we want to, live our lives, just like we do. We could decide whether you want to buy organic, non-organic. Some things the unorganic banana is not going to be terrible. A strawberry is terrible. They kind of, you just have to massage, everybody has to do it for themselves. But I just, understanding the implications are really important. So yeah, I do think that people are becoming more aware.
So would you say you feel, having written the book and seen the reception and the reaction, has that buoyed your optimism? Has it leveled off? It sounds like there's cause for optimism, which is very.
I have had, it's, forget the beauty magazines. In
Yeah.
social media, I have women contacting me every day, saying, I was getting a rash every time I was coloring my hair. I never even thought that it was from the hair color. I write about this in the book. I was getting migraines. Okay, so we're putting like almost black coal tar on my head, which is a super rich blood supply, and I would go home and, it was when I'd sleep, it was on my pillow, I could wake up and I'd go, oh, look, there's some hair dye I left on my pillow. It didn't, I went to my doctor, I told her I was getting migraine, she said, no, it's not from the hair dye.
Wow.
She said it's not, it's hormones. And, we blame everything on hormones during some of those hormonal years. And so I just kind of racked it up to the hormones. But I would scratch my head and I'd go, 3 days later, and I'd go, there's still like dye, on my head. I asked my hairdresser, I had no idea how long hair dye has to stay on, on your hair. You just don't know this. And when I went to the FDA and I checked the coal tar checklist for hair dye, it said it should only be left on for, I can't remember, half an hour. And I remember my hairdresser telling me, your grays are getting resistant. We have to leave it on longer. And I would just sit there, reading the magazines for however, and who knows what harm. So it's just, we just don't know these things.
And that makes me think of, there's a great scene in the movie Malcolm X by Spike Lee, where, and I know it was a thing, it might still be a thing, but like in the 40s or whatever, when African Americans would straighten their hair, and it was like lye or whatever, but the scene
Still lie.
Even after like 15 seconds,
right.
Denzel Washington is like, can I wash it? And he's like, you gotta let it sit for a minute, but it was like 15 seconds, but in a sense, this is a more insidious, because it's not causing immediate horrific pain,
right.
People think, well, that can't be that bad for me.
Yeah.
If these products caused obvious immediate pain, it would probably get more attention. But
I think that's where you're playing like Russian roulette a little bit. You're like, but I really like it. It's so shiny. It's so nice. It feels good. And you just. Just knowing doesn't necessarily mean that we'll do what's right. We need to get companies behind it. We need some of the magazines and the media to get behind it, and we need to have, examples. I had no examples. I mean, there's Helen Mirren and Jamie Lee Curtis.
Sure.
I think that's about it. And I think that's still about it, actually, when I think about it. There are very few women that we see, and most women have seen gray hairs, but I think by the age of 32. I had very dark hair, so I think I was by 30s I was pretty gray, but
right.
it was salt and peppery then. So it's hard to tell because I go in all the time.
Well, I don't get the sense that that's an issue in this audience, but one of the things, it seems to come up no matter who the author visiting is,
right.
What they've written about. It could be fiction, it could be a novel.
Mm-hmm.
One of the pushbacks from society is, why do you have to bring politics into it? And I think as it relates to the art of storytelling and the purpose of narrative and the larger implications of what 1455 is hoping to do by having these kind of discussions, is recognizing that silence is definitely not an option, and politics have nothing to do with it, because you have to recognize that the forces that you're fighting, in this case in the beauty industry, there's a lot of money being paid to craft that narrative. So doing nothing, you're not just not getting political, you're allowing a very politically motivated entity to craft their own narrative. So I think dialogue and discussion and awareness is obviously the first step, and then powerful storytelling that can put a human face on it. So you're doing good work for the literary cause, but I think you're doing good work for this larger fight.
But if you take the tobacco industry as an example,
Yep.
it was only in the late 50s people started to be concerned about that. it took another 30 years for
Mhm.
anything really to get done. And that was an issue that affected men and women.
Yeah.
Here, this is predominantly a women's issue. I mean, there are some men who
Mhm.
dye their hair, but not in the numbers
No.
that women color their hair.
No,
So, I mean,
14%
you're
men
just
dye their hair.
starting out on
That's
a
true.
process. Like if you compare it to tobacco, you're just in the late 50s.
Exactly. I think you're on, that's
Absolutely.
absolutely. And I talk about, actually, I compare that in the book. And it was actually the activists who pushed who pushed tobacco over and over. If you read this really good New York Times expose about that, and it was just recently brought up again. And they pushed the envelope, and it was heavily lobbied, but, people were, the scientists had already made the connection between lung cancer and.
Well, speaking of another movie, The Insider, with Al Pacino and Russell Crowe, talks about, and very germane to today's news, it was a whistleblower that came out of the tobacco industry, a scientist, that literally risked his life to say, we're putting carcinogens, and it was, formaldehyde, I think, was one of the shocking, cigarettes. We're putting
Formaldehyde.
actual
Imagine.
carcinogens in this and purposefully it wasn't for flavor, it was to enhance the nicotine rush. So I think that's a brilliant point, that it's early days. And thinking of, I waited tables and bartended in my 20s, and I think back to, it seems like the Stone Ages, that we worked in an environment where it was full of smoke. And you say that to a millennial, and they'd say, you did? And that was in our lifetime, and
Yeah.
it seems prehistoric. So I think that's another cause for hope, that we'll maybe look back in 30 years and say, we used to put tar in our hair. I think we're headed in that direction, but it's a slow build.
It's a slow build, and it's good it's good to keep the awareness there. And, it's really important. I obviously work for an a big, huge environmental organization, and the regulatory issues are just a constant battle for us. But that's not necessarily just in this administration. It has
Sure.
been throughout. This is not just a Republican. It's not, the Republican. Obama did very little, and before them, the Democrats didn't. It's a very slow process. Now, that said, there's a certain stronghold that the chemical industry has on certain politicians, and they pad the pockets, and we all know this.
Yeah.
And that's who, when we as an organization, when I go in with parents and we talk more, we don't even activate in New York, because we don't need to get into to push them. We really talk to Virginia and other places. No, we talk to others. We really go into other states that we really can do work on pushing for stronger regulations, for environmental regulations,
Absolutely.
and for. It's I thought and I write about this right at the end of the book. And my first readers was like my best friend, who I grew up with my whole life, and she knows me the best, and she is a incredible reader. She reads every single thing. And her husband is he's somebody who could do the New York Times crossword puzzle, he does it every single day, and he does the hardest one. He's he's a stickler for words. And so I thought, he's an engineer. And I thought, I'm gonna have them do the first read. My husband read the book too. And I'd have them do the first read, and they kept coming back to me with they said, both of them said, do not politicize this, do not. And in the end, I did a little, and it was hard not to with what was going on. And I do say that, I say it right at the end. I said I thought a lot about whether or not to include politics in this hair story. We all know that politics is polarizing. It's also a moving target. But here's the thing. In this particular space and time, politics and protecting human health are inseparable. Those without a degree in toxicology have almost no way to determine what is safe and what is not in hair dye. To leave it up to consumers to find answers to complicated health issues is absolutely unjust, and women often bear the brunt of this injustice. We are disproportionately far more than men victims of body pollution and therefore diseases linked to our environment. So anyway, so I really, that's probably as hard as I get into it, but I did get into it a little bit in the book.
Well, all politics is local, and it doesn't get much more local than what we're putting in our hair and our bodies.
There you go.
So,
There you go. I should have said that at the end. That would be a great class. I'm going to use that for the next article.
there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for being here, Ronnie. There will be books available courtesy of the Winchester Book Gallery. I'm sure Ronnie would be happy to sign and continue discussion if anyone has questions.